American Islamic College, a place where knowledge becomes transformation. Your support moves the mission forward in the work and in the world. This is more than education, it's a calling, because every contribution leads to a life of purpose and impact.
And thematic elements that otherwise, on a surface reading, are not always readily apparent. And here again with the book, so he sent down his servant the book and made it unerringly straight. وَلَمْ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ عِوَجًا. This Surat Al-Kahf, we're told to recite every Friday, and especially towards the end of time, when things are fuzzy and we really don't know how to interpret events, and it's almost apocalyptic or a kind of breakdown. And so this is, you'll see a series of stories in this surah that are have layers of meaning and are very, very enigmatic. And among them, so I'm not going to read some of the beginning, but I'll just point out those surahs, and then Dr. Timothy and Ustaza Tahira, I'll let you take us wherever you want to go in this surah in the time that we have. But the first story is the the youth who are of the cave, the people of the cave. They have an oppressive situation, and so they're told to retreat into a cave, and they pass centuries there. Maybe the plain sense reading of this is that this is, youth are vigorous and they are active, but in this case, they're being told to retreat and withdraw because there's no benefit coming from an engagement. Wallahu alam. Then the second story is the story of the garden, where there's a wealthy person and he thinks his wealth is everything, and it also makes him doubt his Lord. And so one is of the youth who are pious and retreat. One is of the wealthy person who gets lost in his wealth. Then there's the story of Moses and Khidr. Moses, the prophet, encounters a teacher who knows more than him. And so this episode, this encounter is about knowledge.
Yeah.
And then the final encounter is Dhul Qarnayn, which has to do with power, political power. And so you can see the different kind of lessons in the different domains have been put together here. They're very obscure and difficult to interpret. But in the beginning and the end of the surah, you have a common theme that comes, which is perhaps in verse number 7, we have made everything, we have adorned the earth with attractive things so that we may test people to find out which of them are best in conduct or do the best. And in the end of the surah, you will see, the Quran will ask, should I tell you, it tells the Prophet to ask the people, should I tell you of those who are in greatest loss with respect to their deeds? It's those who lose, who expend all of their energies in the life of this world. الذين ضل سعيهم في الحياة الدنيا وهم يحسبون أنهم يحسنون صنعا. And they think that they're doing good things, but they're actually completely consumed in this material world, and that's where they lose everything. So that's an intro, a thematic, and also some topical. And let me just turn it back to the two of you.
Wow.
What can we do?
That's a beautiful overview in summary, Mahan. I have to say that it's that's a hard one to follow. That was a beautiful synthesis of going through the parables, and what's really interesting to me is the Quranic use. I know scholars of the New Testament talk a lot about how Jesus taught in parables, but here we also see that the Quran is also teaching in these parables, these teaching stories, and some of them, as you said, are very, very, very deep and very, very difficult to completely to decipher in a decisive way. But it's and these are all just amazing parables. I think that of the parables, although all of the lessons are so profound, but I love this encounter with Moses and the spirit guide, whom tradition names as Khidr, but God sends this enigmatic figure to meet up with Moses and to instruct him, to almost initiate him in a much deeper form of knowledge than anything Moses had hitherto known. And we're talking about Moses. I mean, we're talking about a prophet who spoke directly with God. We're talking about, so Moses is sort of representing the best of humanity in a way. And even Moses's knowledge is shown to be so partial, and Moses's tendency to judge without a complete understanding is so apparent here. But in a way, if Moses didn't have the patience to wait for the full revelation of God, then in a way we're all lined up behind Moses, making all kinds of judgments about situations that we really don't fully understand. And I don't know if we have time tonight to walk through this initiation of Musa, upon him be peace, but it's an incredible story.
Yeah, I think it would be good for people to at least hear one of them, so we get a sense. There's a pattern. There's 3 encounters that he has.
Yes.
But there's a pattern where his teacher says, I'm supposed to come learn from you. And the teacher says, you won't be able to be patient with me. And so he says, no, give me a chance. It's all right, fine. And then they go, and then he does something that's incomprehensible to Moses, where he sinks a ship, or he kills a boy.
No, it starts with the ship, with the boat. Yeah.
Yeah. So Moses said, well, what are you doing? He's like, look, I told you, you're not going to be able to get what I'm doing. And so there were always hidden meanings where, had he not destroyed the boat, far worse things would have happened. And in each case, that's the pattern. But Moses is not able to understand. And perhaps the lesson there is that, one of the most common things I encounter with people is they say, why has this happened?
Yeah.
Why me? Why does God do this? Right? That's Moses and Khidr. I mean, that's a classic. That's the archetypal Moses and Khidr encounter. And we'll never know. And I think at least we won't know in this world. And maybe what the Quran is telling us is, don't even try. Some things you'll never know. You just have to kind of accept that there's a greater sovereign who's at work. And, there's the way that the previous surah ends. قُلِ الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ الَّذِي لَمْ يَتَّخِذْ وَلَدًا. So praise be to God, belongs to God who has no offspring. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ شَرِيكٌ فِي الْمُلْكِ. And has no partner in his rule. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ وَلِيٌّ فِي الظُّلِّ. So this idea that he has no partner in his rule, right? Don't even try to. If you believe there's a ruler, and he is the governor of affairs, and you don't understand something, you can be at peace if you accept there's a ruler who's got it. But if that's not there, then we're going to second question everything. There's something we're not going to get. I don't know. I'll stop there. Ustaza Tahira, go for you. Tell us something from this.
Well, I think I just wanted to actually go back to how you started the surah, since I think we're just trying to, maybe in the last 10-15 minutes we have left. You mentioned something really important. I think I just want to make relevant to our listeners about Surah Kahf. And most of us have heard of this and know this, but from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, there's so many places where the significance of reciting Surah Kahf, in particular, as you mentioned, Dr. Mahan, at the end of times, or the end of this idea of like protection from Dajjal. So I want to remind us that the Prophet, in a Sahih hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, we are told to at least memorize the first 10 ayat of Surah Kahf for protection from the time of the tribulations of the end of times, and that anyone who recites Surah Kahf from one Friday to the next, the Prophet ﷺ said in a Sahih hadith that there will be a light shining from them. And again,
Right.
there's like different opinions amongst the scholars about what does that really mean. When I just like recently reread the surah, I was thinking a lot about and I just loved how in the beginning you compared the beginning of Isra and then the beginning of Kahf. I didn't think of it that way, so that was really cool. Thank you for that. I think about how the juxtapositioning of like going from where the Prophet is ascending to heavens, but then all of a sudden the scenery goes back into the cave, right? It's almost like back into this retreat. And that is actually where the Quran is first revealed, right? In this idea of he's retreating back into the cave. He's right. That's actually where the Quran's revealed. But the whole purpose of the Quran being revealed is not so the Prophet could retreat back. It's actually going back out, right? It's actually going back out and preaching to his own people. So in my reading, at least in the tadabbur I've done, is I think Surah Kahf overall deals with like 4 types of fitna or fitan, which would make, how do you translate that? Like trials,
maybe.
Tribulations, yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say like fitna of shirk. So that's the whole story of like the 7 young men, and some scholars say that's modern day Ephesus, wherever that is. Yeah, and I've been there, so it's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these like caves that they take you to and say this is possibly where they were.
Mm-hmm.
And how many years we don't know. Even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says like don't focus on that, right? Like when you recite the beginning of Kahf of how many years were they there for, or who was there, what was the name of the dog, things like that aren't as relevant. And if you notice the rest of the Quran, it doesn't necessarily always give all these details, even though there's like parables in it. Even the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, for us, it's in scenes and they move very quickly, right? So even the story of Musa alayhi salam with Qidr or Al-Qadr, we see more in the Shi'i as well as Sunni like hadith literature about like more about him versus in the actual Quran. And like people are really, I think, obsessed in some way with like who was he, this mysterious, magical, magnificent person. And there's actually quite a lot of interesting differing opinions about like, does he still exist? Is he still around? Ibn Kathir obviously doesn't believe that he's still alive, but there were some scholars who actually believed that like he was still around even when the Prophet passed away, that he came and met Imam Ali radiallahu anh. And so in the Shi'i tradition, there's an interesting, and I'm not obviously part of that, so I can't speak too much, but I just want to point out to our viewers and listeners that there's a very interesting conversation about him, but it's not necessarily in the Quran. It's obviously in hadith literature. Anyway, going back to the fitna of shirk, then the fitna of money, the garden story, the fitna of knowledge, I think that's in the story of Musa alayhi salam. And then finally, it's the end with Dhul Qarnayn. I think it's about the fitna of power. And so all of these things, the 4 areas that humans are tested with. And in the stories, you also see how you can be protected from those things. So even like the first 10 verses, my teacher always said, the secret of Surah Kahf is right in the first 10 verses, where the young men are asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their dua, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً وَهَيِّئْ لَنَا مِنْ أَمْرِنَا رَشَدًا. And it's actually, some scholars recite that when they recite Surah Kahf, they recite it 3 times. It's, if you go to the Muslim world, they'll recite it.
Usada, translate that dua, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can do it, but Mahan, you want to just read out the translation?
Sure. Our Lord, grant us your mercy and find us a good way out of our ordeal.
That's
okay,
nice.
fast forward the story of Musa. Okay, here's what I think is really cool and relevant to our time, right? And I've talked to like Gen Z and millennials about this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses, and I don't know if you guys find this, like, if you've done tadabbur on this, right? The word ittaba, right? Musa alayhi salam says, I want to follow you. And he uses this, like, if you think about the postmodern context, it's so interesting to me that like, that's what we do right now. We follow people, right? And I just find that really interesting that that's actually the term, because when I was younger and I would read, I'm sorry?
That's so interesting. Like we follow on X or Twitter and, follow me on Instagram or even on LinkedIn. You can follow actual feeds.
Mm.
And so just the word that comes, you point, as you point out, in the surah, there's a repetition of this where Moses follows Khidr, and then other places as well. I'm just trying to keep the group that may not fully grasp the linguistic aspects with us. We keep going. This is very interesting. And by the way, we're kind of at time, so
Yes.
we'll finish this thought and then we'll wind down. But go ahead.
Mm.
So a couple of things I've been really thinking about, right, is this idea of like, okay, so Dr. Timothy, you just mentioned this, right, is that here's someone who is a person who we say spoke with God, right? Musa Kalimullah, right? And then we also understand, I don't know if there's full agreement on this, that when did this actually happen? Was it pre-Pharaoh or post-Pharaoh? So this is like after he's accomplished a great ordeal, right? Like, let my people go. And he's at this peak of his life almost, right? And then now he's told, well, guess what? You actually don't know. Someone knows more than you, basically.
Mm.
In the Hadith literature, actually, we find that Khadr alayhi salam actually is humble, and he actually tells him, I know some things more than you, and you actually know some things more than me, O Musa, right? So there's this complementation. My reading, though, subhanAllah, every time I get to this part is like this magnificent person. Basically, Musa alayhi salam still says in Satajiduni insha'Allah, right? So that word comes back again, or that phrase comes back again. So, it's something to think about, is like, okay, so even Musa alayhi salam is recognizing that I'm going to try to be patient, insha'Allah,
if God
right?
wills.
If God wills. But here's what I want to think, leave us with, right? Musa alayhi salam still has to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. And when I read these verses, I remind myself that sometimes not knowing is a blessing, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you don't have to know everything, because sometimes not necessarily knowing certain things could actually be a great blessing for you. And while it may cause some level of discomfort, there is always, we believe, divine wisdom in that process for us. And it's hard. But if Musa alayhi salam in the Quran is that example for us, that look, he's had to sit in that discomfort as well. And he obviously, like Dr. Timothy pointed, that if, he's a great prophet and we're kind of, following behind him. But his story is supposed to be an example for us. So even Musa alayhi salam had to sit in discomfort of not knowing. And maybe, as we don't know certain things, and maybe that is meant to be something that allows us to recognize that in that time and in that space, that actually could be a source of healing for us, and not a cause of anxiety, if you view it in that way, right? Last thing is...
Oh, go ahead.
Last thing is, there's actually a interesting conversation amongst the scholars around when we talk about like destiny and qadr Allah, where it says وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا, that the parent, the reason that certain that in the story of the how he goes through each parable, one of the reasons that's given that, and Mahan, maybe you can, Dr. Mahan, you can actually go to that part. I think you know what I'm talking about.
It's when he killed the youth. Yes. Yes.
And he says, basically, وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا. Where am I? I'll share the screen. كان وراءهم ملك يأخذ قسما من الغنم فكان أبواه مؤمنين فخشينا أن يكون
81. So, and we desired that the Lord would give them in exchange a better son. Yeah, in Ayah 81. Yeah.
So in Ayah 82, where it says وَأَمَّا الْجِدَارُ فَكَانَ لِغُلَامَيْنِ يَتِيمَيْنِ فِي الْمَدِينَةِ وَكَانَ تَحْتَهُ كَنْزٌ لَهُمَا وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا. This, is very interesting to me, that's actually one of the reasons given, right? So we know from our understanding of, many scholars talk about like the fiqh of like if your parents did something wrong, does it actually impact the child? We know that every that does not get passed, right? The sins of our parents don't get passed down to us. However, if your parents are actually good, can there be a positive impact to the generations that come? So that actually, this particular verse is often in engagement and conversation around that topic. While the reverse doesn't work, the idea that if you have salihin, the parents who are salihin, it can actually have a good impact on the generations. I'll stop there.
Okay, that's beautiful. And just just to dovetail with that in a kind of final thought, that one of the really impressive things about Moses here, I mean, obviously he gets caught up in judgment without full information. And so he gets caught 3 times imposing judgment, and he's told 3 times, you've judged without understanding. So in a way, he's kind of showing us, right, what we're doing all the time is we're judging things without full knowledge. But what really impresses me is that this prophet who spoke with God and spoke, spoke power to Pharaoh, he sees somebody in the desert who knows more than he does. And instead of saying, yeah, I know stuff too, he's like, will you please take me on as a student? Will you, the epistemological humility, the sense that, wow, I found someone who knows something. Clearly he knows something that I don't know. Would you take me as your student? And I promise I'll be patient. Like it's like those Kung Fu movies when students come to a great master and he says, no, I won't take you. And they'll say, please, please, no, I won't take you. And they sit outside his door for day after day after day until finally he says, okay. And so, but Moses has that kind of spirit, that humble spirit of seeking knowledge. And so the one thing we can only imagine that after these encounters and after all these perplexing scenarios, each time where Moses was caught in a judgment and he was corrected, that Moses then was left to kind of wander the desert in a sense of wonder. Like, wow, like the world is so much more complex and reality is so much more complex than anything that I previously thought. And so it kind of then kind of inspires us to walk with a sense of wonder and not to judge, but to say that, and we have to judge actions, and the Quran is very clear about that. We have to make choices, but we can never judge the totality of a human being, even if it's a human being that's done terrible things, or even like we don't have that picture. We don't have that knowledge. We can say that, well, this particular action is wrong, but again, we're kind of taught that, like, we don't have a complete picture, and so we have to be very careful about our judgments. Sorry, Dr. Mahan.
No. That's a great, that's really interesting way and relatable way how you put that encounter with Moses and the epistemological humility. I love that, and I, thanks to Ustad for pointing out the various themes and this idea of shirk, especially because that's actually a major theme, and this is maybe where we can wrap it up. And then to close, this has been our longest night, but it's okay. To close, maybe you can recite Surah Al-Asr is what we've been closing out with, if that's okay with you. It's a brief surah and it's a good parting surah. And then hopefully we'll hear from you tomorrow again as we go into Surah Maryam, and maybe we can hear the 10 ayahs of Surah Al-Kahf. But if you look at how Surah Bani Israel ended, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ شَرِيكًا فِي الْمُلْكِ, in the last verse, and he has no partner in his rule. And look at how the last verse of Surah Al-Kahf is, وَلَا يُشْرِكْ بِعِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ أَحَدًا. And so the Prophet is told to command people that, I'm just a mortal, like أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ, I'm just a mortal like all of you. And he's addressed as Asra bi abdihi laylan and Asra ala abdihi al-kitab. So the humanity of the Prophet is emphasized.
Hmm.
So let's elevate him, right? And only difference between me and other mortals is revelation comes to me. And whosoever hopes to meet his Lord should just do good deeds.
Hmm.
Just do good deeds and don't associate. Don't do shirk. Don't associate. Like there was anyone in God's rule, and don't associate anyone in your share of worship with God.
Right.
Have it only to him. So this is a major theme of this, of the whole deen of the religion, but particularly you can see it accented in these two surahs. So
beautiful.
And I think, Dr. Mahan, what's important to note is, like, in the chronological order, and I know there's always difference of agreement around that, and I know we're at the end of this time, but I think it's important to know that Surah Isra and then Kahf, right? They're still considered Makki surahs, but they come chronologically after Surah Maryam. And Maryam now we're going to go to next, right? So in chronological order, Maryam actually comes before, right? Many scholars say that it comes right before they go to Abyssinia, right? In the possibly end of year 4, right?
Right.
But Wallahu alam, I think the beauty of that is you have these miracles happening, right? Miracles, like in all of these different, the two surahs, the Mi'raj as a miracle, what happens to the cave, the people of the cave as a miracle, Musa alayhi salam, and Al-Khadr and all of that. And then the greatest miracle that humanity has ever witnessed is right about to come. So you guys have to join us for that, inshallah khair.
Tomorrow night. Great.
Yeah. Okay, Surah Asr, right?
Yeah, let's go with
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. صدق الله العظيم. Do I translate that, or you want to translate?
Mahan has a beautiful way of translating. Mahan, can you do that for us?
Well, it's, I seek refuge in God from Satan the accursed, beginning in the name of God, compassionate, the merciful, is what's recited before any recitation. And then the surah is by the passage of time through the ages, or by the late afternoon, and at the end of the day when you're counting up how much I made, you're in a loss. You didn't make a profit. All this applies to all of humankind, except for those who believe and had righteous conduct and exhorted each other to live by the truth and to persevere in the face of hardship.
I mean, thank you all. Thanks
Thank you.
to those who have joined us tonight online, and thanks to those who will join us, outside of this moment, but on YouTube. And God willing, I'll get to see both of you, inshallah, tomorrow night. All right.
Inshallah.
Okay. All right. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Earn your fully accredited MA in Islamic Studies in as little as 1 year and start as early as this spring. If you've done Alamiya, studied at a Darul Uloom, or gone deep in traditional seminary life, but nobody's giving you credit for it in the academic world, this is your bridge from classical Islamic learning to recognized credentials. Fully online, affordable, built for students just like you. Apply now and prepare to lead a life of purpose and impact.